We like to think of possession as a relic of the past, a medieval superstition used to explain away mental illness, epilepsy, or hysteria. In our modern, scientific world, we have diagnoses for voices in the head. We have medications for convulsions. We have logical, sterile explanations for the things that go bump in the night. But every once in a while, a case emerges that defies the textbooks. A case where the medical charts don't make sense, where the behavior goes beyond madness into something impossible. These are the cases where police officers, doctors, and hardened skeptics are forced to stand in a room and witness the laws of physics bending. Tonight, we are not talking about movies. We are opening the files on 4 real, documented cases of alleged demonic possession. These are the stories that terrified their communities, baffled the experts, and in some cases, ended in a tragedy so profound it shook the world. From the boy who inspired The Exorcist to the modern-day crucifixion in a Romanian monastery, these are the true stories of when the devil allegedly came to stay. If you have seen the 1973 film The Exorcist, you have seen the Hollywood version of this story. But the reality of Roland Doe, a pseudonym given to a 14-year-old boy named Robbie Mannheim, is far more disturbing because it happened in the quiet suburbs of Maryland and St. Louis, witnessed not just by priests, but by doctors and family members. It began in 1949. Roland was a normal, quiet boy who was very close to his aunt, Harriet. Harriet was a spiritualist, a woman fascinated by the other side, and she introduced young Roland to the Ouija board. They would spend hours contacting spirits. When Harriet died in St. Louis, Roland, grief-stricken, tried to contact her alone using the board. That is when the house began to turn against him. It started with sounds. Scratching in the walls. The sound of heavy boots marching in the attic when no one was there. But soon, the activity focused entirely on Roland. Objects would fly off his desk. His bed would shake violently at night. His family, terrified, did what any rational family would do. They took him to a doctor, then a psychiatrist, then a psychologist. Every test came back normal. The boy was physically and mentally healthy. Desperate, they turned to their Lutheran minister, who, after witnessing the boy's bed slide across the room on its own, advised them to see a Catholic priest. This led them to Father William Bowdern and Father Raymond Bishop, who would eventually perform over 30 exorcisms on the boy. Father Bishop kept a meticulous diary of the events. He recorded things that science simply cannot explain. He wrote that during the rites, strange, red scratches would appear on Roland's body. But they weren't random. Words would form on his skin, rising like welts. The word hell appeared on his chest. Images of Satan's face would manifest on his leg. During one session at Election Brothers Hospital in St. Louis, the boy broke free from his restraints. He pulled a bed spring loose and slashed the arm of Father Halloran, a Jesuit priest assisting in the rite. Witnesses reported that the room would turn freezing cold. The boy's voice would drop several octaves, becoming a guttural, menacing growl that spat Latin phrases, a language Roland did not know. The most terrifying aspect of the Roland Doe case is the sheer number of witnesses. This wasn't a family hiding a secret in a basement. This happened in hospitals. 48 people, including 9 Jesuits, witnessed the phenomena. They saw the bed levitate. They saw the words manifest on his skin. The exorcism concluded in April 1949. The priest demanded the demon reveal its name. The boy, in a voice of pure hatred, screamed, "Spite." Moments later, a loud, thunderous crack echoed through the hospital, audible to everyone in the building. Roland suddenly went limp. When he woke up, he remembered nothing. He went on to live a completely normal life, married, had children, and never spoke of the events again. But the diary remains, a clinical, day-by-day account of a battle for a young boy's soul. Our second story is perhaps the most controversial and heartbreaking case of possession in the 20th century. It is the story that inspired the film The Exorcism of Emily Rose, but the real ending was not a Hollywood triumph. It was a courtroom. Anneliese Michel was born in Bavaria, West Germany, in 1952. She was a sweet, deeply religious girl, but at 16, she began to suffer from severe convulsions. She was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy and put on medication, but the medicine didn't work. In fact, her condition evolved into something darker. She began to see devil faces on the people around her. She heard voices telling her she was damned and would rot in hell. She fell into a deep depression, but it was her physical behavior that terrified her family. She began to drink her own urine off the floor. She ate spiders and coal. She would rip the clothes off her body and perform hundreds of deep knee bends a day until her ligaments ruptured. She couldn't walk past a crucifix or a picture of Jesus without snarling. Her family, watching their daughter disintegrate and finding no help from medicine, turned to the church. After years of requests, the bishop finally approved an exorcism in 1975. 2 priests, Father Arnold Renz and Pastor Ernst Alt, were assigned to the case. Over the next 10 months, they performed 67 exorcism sessions, and they recorded them. The audio tapes from the Anneliese Michel exorcisms are widely available today, and they are the stuff of nightmares. You hear Anneliese, a frail young woman, growling with a multi-layered, demonic voice that sounds like a wild animal. She screams obscenities. She identifies herself as Lucifer, Cain, Judas, and Nero. She argues with the priests, screaming, "I am not permitted to leave." But while the spiritual battle raged, Anneliese's body was failing. She stopped eating. She believed that starving herself was the only way to weaken the demons. By 1976, she weighed only 68 pounds. She was unrecognizable. Her knees were broken. Her eyes were bruised black. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel died. The cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. The aftermath shocked the world. The state of Germany charged Anneliese's parents and the 2 priests with negligent homicide. The prosecution argued that Anneliese was not possessed, but suffering from psychosis and epilepsy, and that the demons were a result of her religious upbringing influencing her hallucinations. They argued that if she had been force-fed or given sedatives, she would have lived. The defense played the tapes in court. They tried to prove that the entity on those recordings was not human, but the court was not swayed. The parents and priests were found guilty. The case of Anneliese Michel remains a polarizing scar on history. To science, it is a tragic example of how superstition can prevent medical treatment. To believers, it is the story of a girl who became a martyr, battling the forces of hell until her body simply gave out. When you listen to those tapes, however, the legal verdict fades away, and you are left with the chilling sound of a human soul in absolute agony. We travel back to 1906, to the St. Michael's Mission in Natal, South Africa. This case is unique because, unlike Roland Doe or Anneliese Michel, the victim in this story didn't just fall ill. She made a deal. Clara Germana Cele was a 16-year-old orphan girl who had been baptized as an infant. But as a teenager, she became rebellious. In a moment of anger and desperation, she reportedly prayed to Satan, offering her soul in exchange for power. She wanted to be able to control people, to have strength, to be feared. Whatever she said in that prayer, it seems something answered. Within days, Clara began to exhibit strange behaviors. She developed a sudden, violent repulsion to religious objects. If a nun brought a rosary near her, Clara would recoil in pain as if burned. But then, the gifts she asked for began to manifest. Clara, a girl with a basic education, suddenly began to speak languages she had never heard. She spoke fluent German, French, and Polish. She could converse with the nuns in their native tongues, knowing dialects she couldn't possibly have learned in rural South Africa. But it was her clairvoyance that terrified the mission. Clara could look at a person and tell them their deepest, darkest secrets. She would reveal sins they had never confessed to anyone. She humiliated people by shouting out their private shames. And then, there was the levitation. According to the written records of the nuns and priests present, Clara would frequently rise 5 feet into the air. She didn't jump, she floated. She would hover vertically, or sometimes horizontally, suspended above her bed. Her clothes would stiffen, not falling with gravity. When the priest sprinkled holy water on her, she would crash back down to the bed. The mission called in 2 priests, Father Erasmus and Father Mansweat, to perform an exorcism. It lasted for 2 days and was described as a physical brawl. Clara, a teenage girl, possessed the strength of 3 men. She knocked the Bible out of the priest's hands. At one point, she grabbed the priest's stole, the cloth worn around the neck, and tried to strangle him with it. Witnesses described her voice changing, becoming bestial. The sounds coming from her room were described as a savage menagerie. But unlike Anneliese Michel, Clara's story has a different ending. After 2 days of violent struggle, the demon reportedly left. Clara's body went limp. A noxious smell filled the room, and then she woke up. She had no memory of the violence. She was exhausted but free. Clara lived for another 6 years, living a quiet, pious life before dying of heart failure at age 22. Her case is often cited as one of the most textbook cases of possession because it ticked every box: knowledge of hidden things, speaking foreign languages, super strength, and levitation. It stands as a terrifying reminder that sometimes, if you ask the darkness for a favor, it says yes. Our final story is the most recent, and in many ways, the most disturbing, because it happened in the 21st century. This wasn't in the Middle Ages. It happened in 2005, in a remote monastery in Romania, and it serves as a brutal collision between ancient belief and modern law. Marica Irina Cornisai was a 23-year-old woman who had grown up in an orphanage. She had a difficult life, marked by poverty and instability. In 2005, she visited the Holy Trinity Convent in Tanacu, Romania, to visit a friend. She eventually decided to stay and become a nun. But shortly after joining, Marica's behavior changed. She began laughing uncontrollably during Mass. She would scream that the devil was talking to her. The doctors at a local psychiatric hospital diagnosed her with schizophrenia and prescribed medication. But when she returned to the monastery, the priest, Father Daniel Petre Coriginu, and the other nuns decided that the pills weren't working. They believed the doctor was wrong. They believed she was possessed. Father Coriginu was a young, charismatic priest who believed in the literal, physical reality of the devil. He decided that an exorcism was the only way to save her. But this wasn't just a prayer session. This was a medieval torture session. The priest and 4 other nuns locked Marica in a room. When she became violent, they chained her hands and feet. They believed the demon had to be bound. For 3 days, they kept her chained to a wooden cross in a cool room. They put a towel in her mouth to stop her from cursing and screaming. They denied her food and water, believing that starving the body would weaken the devil. They prayed over her continuously, dousing her with holy water. They truly believed they were fighting a spiritual war for her soul. They saw her struggles not as a reaction to being chained and starved, but as the demon fighting back. On June 15, 2005, Marica stopped moving. They called an ambulance, believing she had simply fainted. But when the paramedics arrived, they found a woman who had been beaten, dehydrated, and asphyxiated. Marica Cornisai was dead. The police arrived at the monastery and arrested Father Coriginu and the 4 nuns. The images of the crucifixion hit the global news. The world was horrified. How could this happen in 2005? A nun, chained to a cross, dying of thirst while her sisters prayed over her? The priest was unrepentant. In interviews, he stated, "You cannot take the devil out of people with pills." He insisted that she had been possessed and that she died because the ambulance arrived and the doctors injected her with adrenaline, which he claimed stopped her heart. The court did not agree. Father Coriginu was sentenced to 14 years in prison for murder. The nuns received slightly shorter sentences. The Orthodox Church excommunicated him. The Tanacu case is a terrifying story because it blurs the line between faith and fanaticism. Was Marica possessed? Or was she a schizophrenic young woman who was tortured to death by the very people who were supposed to protect her? It is a stark reminder that belief, when taken to its absolute extreme without reason, can be just as dangerous as any demon. These 4 cases forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. When we look at the scratches on Roland Doe, or hear the tapes of Anneliese Michel, or read the autopsy of Mariska Cornissai, we are confronted with the limits of our understanding. Science tells us these were cases of epilepsy, schizophrenia, and hysteria. Faith tells us they were battles between good and evil. But for the people in those rooms, the families, the priests, the victims, the terror was absolute. Whether the monsters came from hell or from the broken firing of neurons in the human brain, the result was the same. Lives were destroyed, bodies were broken, and the world was left with stories that, once heard, can never be forgotten.